After her illicit and dangerous affair with King Henry VIII, Mary Boleyn fell deeply in love with Will Stafford, a soldier from a poor noble family. Tragically, their union was doomed to a heartbreaking end. He wasn't rich or prestigious enough to openly be with Mary, so the two eloped. When Mary became pregnant, the king discovered their secret and flew into a rage, but her nightmare was just the beginning. Get more on this later. Mary Boleyn's parents, Thomas Boleyn, 1st of Earl of Wiltshire, and Lady Elizabeth Howard, were both savvy courtiers who knew a thing or two about social climbing. According to many, Thomas's ambitions knew no bounds, and he was prepared to sacrifice almost anything to get to the top. It's no wonder that Mary ended up in the middle of some of the Tudor court's most shocking scandals. There's a reason why the Boleyns seemed so power-hungry. They'd previously suffered a dramatic fall from grace, no upstart to the aristocracy. Mary drew blood from the Dukes of Norfolk on her mother's side. Her great-grandfather had passed while fighting against Henry II's forces on the side of Richard III. When Henry II became King of England, he demoted the men of the Boleyn family to earls. Immediately, King Louis VII made moves to send his new wife's English attendants home. But Mary Boleyn had an ace up her sleeve. Her father had recently been appointed England's ambassador to France, so she was allowed to stay. However, just a year later, Louis VII passed. Mary Tador packed her bags to go back to England, but Mary Boleyn decided to stay, and she may have had devious reason to. During the passing of Louis VII, his son-in-law, Francis I, was crowned King of France. Mary Boleyn stayed in France to serve under his Queen Claude, but she was hiding a dark secret from her so-called friend. It was during this time that Mary was said to have begun an illicit affair with King Francis I, and that might not have been the only trouble she was getting into. According to some, Mary Boleyn embarked on a number of affairs with different men during the time she was in Paris. However, history may vindicate her. Yet, many historians believe that these tales about her exploits were exaggerated, all for a very cruel reason. After the departure of Mary Tador and the coronation of Francis I, Mary Boleyn had been alone in Paris, but she was soon joined by her father Thomas and her sister Anne. The trio spent roughly 4 years here, during which time Mary had her affair with Francis. Eventually, the relationship ended, but it wasn't the only relationship that was souring. It was around this time that the relationship between Mary Boleyn and her parents, Thomas and Elizabeth, began to sour. According to one historian, they developed feelings of dislike for their eldest child. Ouch! Was it the affair with Francis, or the rumors that spread about her? Either way, pretty harsh. No wonder she turned to others for the love and affection that she was lacking at home. Nevertheless, the Boleyns were still ambitious and jock-eyed for a position for Mary in the English royal court. Little did they know that they'd be sending her down a dark and twisted road. Upon her return to France, she became a maid of honor to Henry VIII's wife, Catherine of Aragon, putting her squarely in the notorious king's sights. At the same time, Mary Boleyn's parents had been doing their best to find a suitable match, and soon after they came back from France, they settled on one. His name was William Carey, and he was both third cousin and favorite courtier to Henry VIII. Mary and William Carey were married on February 4th, 1520, but it wasn't exactly happily ever after. It's not known exactly when it began, but when things for sure. Soon after her marriage to William Carey, Mary Boleyn began an illicit affair with King Henry VIII. How long did it go on? Did she love him? The answers to many of these questions are mysteries. The pair were actually so discreet that very few accounts of the relationship exist. It would come at a great expense to Mary, but at first, it certainly came with its own benefits. While we may not know much about the affair between Mary Boleyn and Henry VIII, it has been speculated that one person who was close to both knew and kept it a secret for his own dark reasons. That would be William Carey, Mary's husband and Henry's friend. He didn't seem to mind sharing his wife with the king. Carey benefited from numerous prestigious appointments and manors given to him by Henry during the course of the affair. In 1524, Mary Boleyn became pregnant and gave birth to a baby girl that she named Catherine Carey. But soon, dark rumors began to swirl about the young family. Due to the timing of Catherine's birth, many believe she may have been fathered by Henry VIII and not William Carey. Many even said that Catherine looked like the king. However, Henry VIII was way more in the son game, legitimate or not. He was clearly only interested in male heirs and had already acknowledged the illegitimate son years earlier, so Catherine's parentage was something of a moot point. At this point, both Mary and Anne were firmly entrenched in the Tudor court. One would expect that they were close, but Anne was an unmarried maid of honor, while Mary held the position of lady-in-waiting to her husband's mistress. While Mary was said to be the most beautiful of the pair, it was Anne who had inherited her parents' ambitious nature, and soon enough she put it to good use. In 1525, Mary Boleyn became pregnant again. If her affair with the king had survived the birth of the first child, the second pregnancy was the final nail in the coffin for her affair with Henry VIII. By the time that Mary's second child, Henry Carey, was born, the king had definitely turned his attentions elsewhere. So did anyone else notice that Mary named her children Henry and Catherine, the names of the alleged lover, and his wife? People in the court must have, because once again, there were whispers that Henry Carey was the king's illegitimate son. However, those rumors were dispelled pretty quickly. After all, something way more juicy and scandalous was about to go down. Their affair might have been over, but what Mary VIII did to Mary Boleyn in 1526 had to sting regardless. It was in this year, shortly after the birth of Mary's second child, that the king began to publicly pursue her sister, Anne. If Mary was affected by this quick turn, she didn't let it show. She had a position in the court to protect, after all, and she'd need all the help she could get, considering what was in store for her. Anne Boleyn had always been their parents' favorite, and now Henry VIII was ardently pursuing her. It couldn't have been easy for Mary Boleyn, but her nightmare was just beginning. In 1528, a mysterious and dangerous illness swept through the Tudor court. The sweating sickness, as it was called, soon threw a dark pallor over the Tudor court. After the outbreak began, Henry VIII fled his home and dissolved the court, hoping to avoid it altogether. The Boleyns retreated to their home of Hever Castle, but sadly both Anne Boleyn and William Carey contracted the sickness. Henry VIII sent his personal physician to care for Anne, but the prognosis for Mary's husband wasn't so promising. After the care of the king's doctor, Anne Boleyn recovered from the sweating sickness, but William Carey wasn't as lucky. He passed on June 22, 1528, at just 28 years old, leaving his wife Mary a widow. The loss was devastating, but the heartache wasn't over yet. William Carey had been a successful and wealthy courtier. He had an esteemed position with the Tudor court and had been a favorite of Henry VIII's. However, despite this, he left behind considerable debts when he passed, and the burden fell to his widow, Mary Boleyn. She was in deep trouble, but the worst was yet to come. Following the loss of her husband, Mary Boleyn struggled desperately to pay off her widow's debt. She'd been at the center of Tudor court, but now she was utterly destitute. Boleyn even began to pawn her own jewelry, but it still wasn't enough. When Mary Boleyn's husband William passed on, her father's reaction was utterly cold-blooded. Thomas Boleyn offered little financial support to Mary in the wake of her widowhood. It took her sister Anne's intervention to secure Mary a very handsome widow's pension of €100 a year. While Mary's 10-year-old son, Henry Carey, was being educated at the expense of his Aunt Anne, the same old rumors about the boy began to follow him to the monastery. Some of the monks believed their pupil was, in fact, the illegitimate son of Henry VIII. When the king continued to support Henry financially long after his father's passing, it added some weight to that theory. As if having affairs with both Boleyn girls wasn't enough, Henry VIII continued to have a wandering eye, but it was one that was nearsighted. It's rumored that Henry may have conducted an affair with another relative of Mary and Anne's. The alleged other woman was either Mary Shelton or her sister Madge, both cousins to the Boleyn family. If it seems like Henry isn't casting a wide net, I'll add that Ursa's Socratic families were very tightly bred, so the dating pool was very shallow. Henry VIII had fallen for Anne Boleyn in 1526, but unlike her sister Mary, she refused his advances. She didn't want to be his mistress, she wanted to be his queen. Henry scrambled to find a way to get rid of Catherine of Aragon, who was approaching 40 and who had yet to bear him any sons. The ensuing drama was utterly chaotic, and Mary Boleyn would often get caught in the middle through it all. Henry VIII had been notoriously discreet about his affair with Mary Boleyn. However, when he saw an opportunity to use it to his advantage, he finally spilled the beans. See, long before Henry VIII had been married to Catherine of Aragon, she'd been briefly married to his brother, and when he wanted to leave her for Anne Boleyn, he used this as an excuse to have the marriage annulled. But knowing he'd used this excuse once, he had to cover his bases to protect himself. The only reason we know for sure that Henry VIII had an affair with Mary Boleyn is because he admitted to it before marrying Anne. He needed a dispensation for the marriage to be accepted, and he had to admit that he'd been with Anne's sister. With that out of the way, he was free to finally wed Anne, thereby screwing Catherine of Aragon over twice, each time in a different way, with the same rules. Anne Boleyn spent 7 years biding her time and waiting for Henry VIII to become her husband, while Anne was popular at court, and the king was known for lavishing her with gifts. She was also detested by those who remained loyal to Catherine of Aragon, and was even once attacked by an angry mob of women. Finally, after Henry VIII received his dispensation to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, he was free to wed Anne Boleyn. Mary Boleyn was one of Anne's attending ladies in waiting at the latter's coronation on June 1, 1533. If her sister marrying her ex-lover made Mary feel awkward at all, she never showed it. Mary Boleyn was still struggling, but as a new sister-in-law to the king, she began to once again benefit from his good graces, likely at the behest of his new bride, Anne. She'd never really reconciliated with her parents following her husband's passing, but at least she had Anne and Henry. Mary was on the list of recipients of gifts from the king in 1532 and 1534, but soon enough they'd all turn on her. Needlework was a standard part of any noblewoman's education, and Mary was no exception. In 1533, she made a New Year's gift to a black work collar, crafted by her own hand, that she gave to Henry VIII. Don't let your mind drift from collars to something dirty. This is well after the affair ended. She was likely grateful to have made it back into the inner circle of the Tudor court. Little did she know her days were numbered. Mary Boleyn's love life had been tumultuous since the beginning, from her early days as the mistress to one king to her later days as the very much married mistress to another. She'd known the advantages and downsides to making political matches, but in 1534, something completely unexpected happened to Mary Boleyn. In 1534, the widowed Mary Boleyn fell deeply and desperately in love, but there was just one problem. His name was William Stafford, and he was a soldier from the noble Stafford dynasty. However, he was a younger son from a lower branch. That her ultra-ambitious parents would never approve, there was also that little thing where Stafford wasn't rich or prestigious enough to openly be with a king's sister-in-law. Regardless, Mary was determined to be with him, and she'd sacrifice it all to do it. Due to her status and lack thereof, Mary Boleyn and William Stafford only saw one option. They eloped in 1534, which should have been a glorious and happy day for the couple. Instead, set off a brutal chain reaction that would ruin their life together. Before it even began, at first they kept their marriage a secret, but soon enough the truth came out. Shortly after their wedding, Mary Boleyn became pregnant. Hiding a wedding is one thing, but hiding a pregnancy is another, especially when the entire Tudor court was anxiously waiting one, as the pressure was on Anne Boleyn to conceive a son for the king. When it became clear that Mary Boleyn was pregnant, the consequences were dire. The truth was out. Not only had Mary Boleyn secretly married a man beneath her station, she was also pregnant by him. Condemnations were swift and brutal, and Boleyn had given Henry aided daughter, but not the son he so desired, and her sister's unexpected pregnancy must have felt like a slap in the face in the midst of her struggles. Hiding Anne instantly turned on her sister, but that was just the start. Mary had never been her parents' favorite child. In fact, she'd actually been their least favorite, and after her father had stiffed her following the loss of her first husband, the relationship between Mary and the Boleyns had been a bit cold, to say the least. When Mary's power-hungry parents found out that she had secretly wed a mere soldier, their icy demeanor turned into white-hot rage. During her secret marriage, Mary Boleyn's parents disowned her, but the nightmare didn't end there. Her actions had flagrantly disregarded the king's authority over her as a courtier, and he was furious. In the end, Henry VIII had his ex-lover and current sister-in-law, Mary Boleyn, banished from court. She had a loss at all. Her story didn't end there. From what we can tell, Mary had no misgivings about everything that she'd sacrificed for William Stafford. Even as Mary begged for Thomas Cromwell, the king's adviser, to intercede with Anne and the king on her behalf, she stood by her man and wrote, "I had rather beg my bread with him than to be with the greatest queen in Christendom, and I believe verily he would not forsake me to be a king." Was this a pointed stab at her sister's choices? In a year of her secret marriage to William Stafford, Mary Boleyn gave birth to a son named Edward. Soon after, she became pregnant again, this time with a daughter. She chose to name the girl Anne. It was most likely a heartbreaking gesture to honor her estranged sister. It's not known if Anne learned of this tribute, as the Queen's life was filled with troubles of her own. Henry VIII had, against all odds, had his marriage to Catherine of Aragon annulled. When he decided to leave Anne Boleyn, he didn't want to take a chance on the same plan not working a second time. On top of that, Anne's position at court was not exactly favorable. Her former ally, Thomas Cromwell, had turned on her, and he had a devious and chilling plan up his sleeve. He conspired to have Anne imprisoned for adultery and treason, but that wasn't all. Mary and Anne's little brother, George Boleyn, was detained by the authorities at the same time, implicated in the same charges as his sister. While Anne and George had always been close, most historians agree that the disturbing charges against the siblings had been drummed up as a way to oust the Boleyns from the Tudor court after Anne had failed to deliver a male heir. It was a devastating blow, but another was waiting the younger Boleyns around the corner. The ambitious Boleyn parents had already disowned Mary Boleyn, but what Thomas Boleyn did to his daughter Anne was even crueler. The sentence for the charges against Anne and her brother George was execution. As a courtier to Henry VIII, Thomas Boleyn reluctantly agreed to the sentence that was handed down to his two youngest children. It was yet another brutal betrayal from the elder Boleyns, and it was all for nothing. Thomas was stripped of his position and left the court in disgrace. Both of Mary's younger siblings were found guilty in separate trials. George was brought to the scaffold for his execution on May 17, 1536. In this final address to the crowd that gathered to watch, he gave them a dire warning, saying to not trust in the flatteries of the court. The Boleyns had done everything in their power to position themselves at the center of the Tudor court, and look where it had gotten them. 2 days later, Mary's sister Anne was led to the scaffold for her own execution. She dressed the crowd and didn't condemn Henry VIII for his betrayal, even going so far to say, "God save the king and send him long to reign over you, for a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never." Many suspect that her kind words were meant to save her remaining relatives from Henry VIII's wrath. While Mary Boleyn never came back to court after her exile, her daughter Catherine had an illustrious career as a professional lady in waiting to future Tudor queens. While the awkward execution of Anne Boleyn in 1536 might have put a damper on her prospects, Catherine managed to become a maid of honor to Henry IV's in 15th means, Anne of Cleves and Catherine Howard. She was also a close friend and chief lady of the bedchamber to her maternal cousin, Elizabeth II of England. During the execution of her siblings, Mary spent nearly a decade with her second husband on their strath or shower lands. With little income, we don't know if it was a comfortable living, but when it comes to the Tudor era, no news was usually good news, meaning that we can perhaps take the silence on their later life to mean that it was relatively peaceful compared to life at the court. She may have been the survivor of the family, but the Boleyn didn't exactly have a long life expectancy. On July 19, 1543, Mary Boleyn passed on. She was only in her early 40s, but was survived by her 4 children. There are no records of what happened to her 2 children by her second husband, but her first 2 children went on to keep the Boleyn family going. Mary Boleyn's life was one of dramatic highs and devastating lows. From her illicit affair to King Henry VIII to her passionate and forbidden love for Will Stafford, Mary's story is filled with intrigue, danger, and defiance. Despite the king's wrath and the perilous circumstances she faced, Mary remained resolute in her love for Will. Her determination to follow her heart, even at great personal risk, speaks to the strength and courage she possessed. Although their union faced immense challenges and led to a tragic end, Mary's legacy endures a tale of unwavering love and resilience in the face of adversity. As we reflect on her life, we honor a woman who defied the norms of her time and stayed true to her heart, leaving behind a story that continues to captivate and inspire. Thank you for joining us and exploring the remarkable and poignant journey of Mary Boleyn.